Okay, welcome to Psych 230, Social Psychology. Today we're talking about the self. Okay, we're going to talk about the self, what that means. It's basically knowledge about ourselves and how we acquire that, and then we'll talk about the situation. So we're starting things off by talking about things that impact basically the social situation. Okay, so we talked about knowledge, we talked about motivation. And today we need to talk about knowledge, motivation. We talked about other knowledge, okay, and appraisals and things like that. And today we just need to talk about the self. Okay, so let's just get started. When we talk about the self, that refers to several things. Okay, one thing it refers to is our self-concept. Okay, the self-concept is basically our view and beliefs about ourselves, okay? Self-concept, right? What we believe about ourselves. So your self-concept might be something like this, right? Maybe you believe that you're a nice, competent individual. Or maybe you're a wild, crazy, outgoing person, right? Just think of something off the top of my head. But that's your self-concept. Whatever you believe about yourself is part of your self-concept, okay? Now, we have multiple selves, okay? We are different things, okay? Like, for instance, I am a teacher, right? Or a professor, I should say. I am a brother, right? I am a father. I'm all those a bunch of things. You know, we have multiple selves. We are different things to different people or different things in different situations, okay? That's part of our self-concept. So it's not just one thing. And we also have a future self, who we would like to be in the future. We have an actual self, who we are in actuality right now. We have an ideal self, who we would like to be or how we would like to be. Ideally, if everything was perfect, everything was the way we wanted to, ideally, what would we be like? What would our lives be like? What would we be, okay? We have an odd self. According to others, how should you be, okay? Like maybe you should get good grades and you should go to school and not cheat and things like that. You need to be honest and fair. That's your odd self, right? And we also have a collective self, who we are, right, as a member of groups, of other people, a family or a collection of friends or a classroom. We live and work with others, right? We are with others, we're social. So we also have a collective self, okay? Just to tell you a little bit more about this, if your actual self, if there's a big difference between your actual self and your ideal self, you usually don't feel very good about yourself. So who you are, let's say right now, how you're doing and who you are right now, if there's a big difference between that and who you would like to be ideally, if everything was perfect, if there's a big difference, then what happens, you feel awful. You feel kind of depressed, you don't feel very good about yourself. You're not very happy, okay? If there's a big difference between your actual self, who you are right now, and who you ought to be according to others, then you feel anxious. Like according to your teacher, you need to be this, this, and this. You need to be writing this well. According to your mother, your father, you need to be acting this way. According to your employer, this is how you should be. But you are very different. Usually that means you should feel anxious, stressed out. Some ideas of how basically these things can interact. So we have multiple selves. Things about who we are now, things about the future, things about who we would ideally like to be. Okay, and we also have the self-esteem. That's how we feel about ourselves, our attitude toward ourselves. Self-esteem, right? So our self-concept is who we think we are or what we believe about ourselves. And our self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves. Okay, and of course we can have high self-esteem, feel good about ourselves, low self-esteem. We can have high and unstable self-esteem. Some people have high self-esteem, but it's not based in reality. So it's unstable. And whenever you point anything out to them that doesn't support what they believe, they can get very angry, okay, because their self-esteem is fragile and it's not really based in reality, okay? Let's keep talking about the self. How do we know things about the self? How do we know who we are or how we are? Well, one thing is through reflected appraisals. Reflected appraisals simply have to do with what we believe other people think of us. So part of what we know about ourselves, right, what we think of ourselves is based on what other people think of us. what we believe other people think of us. Maybe they haven't told you, but we believe that somebody thinks of us in a certain way. An example would be, maybe you know you're attractive because other people tell you you're attractive. They tell you how pretty you are or how good looking you are. And therefore, you believe that they think you're attractive, so therefore you believe you're attractive. That's a reflected appraisal. It's basically what other people tell us, what other people believe about us. If people tell you that you're smart, and they treat you that way, you know, they think you're nice, so they treat you nice, then you think you're nice, right? That's one way we know about ourselves. It's because of what people think of us, what people tell us. Those are called reflected appraisals, okay? We also know about ourselves through social comparison. When we compare ourselves to others, right? Compare our abilities, how smart we are, right? How athletic we are. We can compare our attitudes, right? What we believe on a certain issue, right? Other beliefs, right? An example would be, not a great example, but how do you know you're tall, right? You infer or you know you're tall because you have more height than others. Because when you look around, you're head and shoulders above everybody else. Or you can see that you're above most people. So that means that you're tall, okay? And comparisons are tricky because it depends on who you compare yourself with, right? Like when I compare myself here in the US, I'm only like 5'7", and I walk around and I see that even most women are about my height now, right? And males, or most of them, are taller than me. I infer from that, I believe that I'm short. That's part of my self-concept. But when I go to El Salvador and I walk around, I'm pretty average. I don't feel short there. It depends, okay? There's people who are like 6 feet tall, right? And you might think, yeah, they're tall, right? But if those should be people playing in the NBA, they're short. For the NBA, 6 feet is short. It's like they make fun of you. Oh, hey, little man, hey, you know, you midget, and things like that. I mean, that's derogatory, but, you know, it depends. Do you think you're attractive? You can believe you're attractive because people tell you, but another way you know you're attractive is by comparing yourself, right? How do you compare to others? It depends on who you're around. In one part of town, you can stand out and be very attractive. Go to Hollywood, see how you compare then. And I'm telling you this because I know people who have self-esteem has suffered because of this. You know, someone I knew was from New Jersey. And she complained that, like, she said, you know, where I'm from, I'm pretty. You know, I'm from New Jersey, I'm pretty. And I came to California and now I feel ugly. You know, living in Southern California, it's like, you know, it's all about comparison. You think you're smart, right? Maybe at AVC you are, right? Or maybe your high school. But let's say then you transfer to Harvard, to UCLA, to MIT. How smart do you feel then, right? What is your comparison group now? Okay, all that affects how you feel, your self-concept. You may be actually quite smart or tall or attractive, but you may not feel that way because of your comparison group, who you're comparing yourself to. Hey, you feel poor, right? You might feel poor here in the US. Go to some third world country like El Salvador, like where I'm from. You might feel wealthy over there, okay? But those are all ways in which that affect basically our self-concept, what we believe about ourselves, what people tell us. Those are reflected appraisals, and then our comparisons when we compare ourselves to others. And yes, we always do these things. We compare ourselves. We shouldn't compare ourselves so much, but we do. We also know ourselves because of self-perception, because we observe our own behavior, and therefore we know how we are, right? We observe our own behavior to know about our internal characteristics. Like, you know how honest you are, right? Because you don't lie and steal, right? You know that you don't lie, you don't steal, you tell the truth. You know you're honest, okay? Other people may not know how honest you are because they may not know what you do, or they may think you're honest, but you know you are dishonest because you know that you steal, you know that you lie. They may not know it. So there's also self-perception. You know more about yourself than others. So you may believe things about yourself that are different that other people may be mistaken about, okay? That is self-perception. Only you know basically how wild and crazy you are, how dishonest you are, how honest you are, right? How nice you are. You may come across as nice to other people. People may think you're nice, but maybe you know you're not that nice. Or maybe people think you're mean, but you know you're nice, whatever it is. But that's self-perception, things that you know about yourself because you know yourself best. And there are some things about you that only you can know and other people cannot. And those are usually internal things, like your beliefs, or other things, your beliefs, your attitudes, things like that. Whether you're sensitive, people may not see it, right? But maybe you are, only you know that, okay? There's just certain things that we hide from the public, okay? That we don't want people to know about, but only maybe we know, maybe we're hiding something, or maybe it's just things that are personal. We don't want people to know, and only we know about those things. And the self also involves self-regulation and self-presentation. We regulate ourselves. In other words, we select things in the environment. We select what we want to interact with, right? We select, like our classes, we select who we talk to, what kind of situations we put ourselves in, right? We regulate ourselves. That helps us regulate how we feel and what we think about ourselves, right? Like maybe if you know you're not very good at science, maybe you're not going to select that physics class, right? Because then you might feel that, that you're not very smart, but you want to continue believing that you're smart. So you select situations in which you're going to succeed and don't select things in which you're going to fail. So right, that's part of self-regulation, right? Continuing to believe what we believe about ourselves and feel the way we feel. We monitor things. We monitor how it's going, right? How we're doing in class or how we're doing with people or at work. And we adjust things as needed so we can continue to believe what we believe about ourselves, all right? So maybe, we monitor how things are going in class. Maybe things are not going well. So we ask for help so we can do better and continue to believe that we're smart. Or maybe we drop the class and we say, that instructor sucked or something like that. He's no good, right? And then we continue to believe that we're still smart. We self-regulate, right? We adjust our strategies. I ever wonder why people continue to think certain things about themselves, believe certain things when the evidence suggests otherwise. Why? Because they're self-regulating. Right? They're exposing themselves to information that validates what they believe and what they think about themselves. So, and they continue to believe what they believe. I can give you an example of that. I'm not going to give you too much detail, but, with what happened with the recent election, right? How can people continue to believe things, right? When there's absolutely no evidence, for certain things. Because they select what they listen to, who they listen to, what news they watch, and who they believe. They monitor those things. And if something comes up that doesn't fit with their beliefs, they immediately ignore it, discard it, or they get rid of that voice, right? They adjust their strategies. People are living in their own reality. It's getting out of hand to the extent which people are selecting their own reality to live in, right? And they're selecting things, often things that don't have anything, anything that's even close to what's actually happening out there. So they can end up being very misguided, just out of touch with reality. You have people who believe in cults, okay? And in all kinds of things. Why? Because they choose to believe in certain things. They choose to look at things a certain way. They select certain things. That's part of self-regulation. Hopefully your self-concept, which includes what you believe about yourself, how you feel about yourself, is more grounded in reality, right? But we regulate that to some extent, okay? Or to a large extent, to continue to feel and think what we think. The self also involves something more interesting, self-presentation. We want to control the impressions people form of us. So we actually present ourselves, believe it or not. We're always doing this, except maybe when we're at home by ourselves. But even then, I think we do it. Like we present ourselves. So when you go out in public, or maybe you attend class, I know we're doing things via Zoom now, and some of you may not have your camera and your mic on, a lot of you actually. But yes, we self-present. Like when you go to class, right? You dress a certain way so people can think that you're a normal, decent human being, right? You're probably, well-groomed, right? Wearing clean clothes, you took a shower, that kind of stuff, right? You try not to be mean to people. You try to be nice because you want people to think you're a nice, competent person, you're someone with good hygiene, things like that. Your instructor, the same thing. He shows up or she shows up, usually dressed in a little bit of a certain way to make them look more competent, right? Maybe they show up in a suit so you can infer that they're professionals, or maybe it's semi-casual, or maybe if they don't care too much, they show up in jeans and a t-shirt, but they're presenting themselves. They're telling you something. This is who I am. right? And sometimes they're telling you, that they're competent, that they're smart, that they're good looking, likable, right? That they're nice, but they can be very different outside of that, right? Who we are to the people at work can be very different than who we are to our friends, and what we let our friends see, right? That's self-presentation. What we let our boss see, our families, right? But we are different people, and we present different people in different situations. That's part of self-presentation. Some of us care a lot about what people think about us, and we show different things in different situations, different parts of ourselves, or we show what those people want to see. And some of us don't care that much, and we're always the same across different situations. We'll talk about things like that. That's called self-monitoring, right? It comes up in a different chapter. I used to have it here too, but it's not necessarily that we talk about it now. It'll come up later. We also need to talk about the situation. The situation is, of course, can be powerful in determining what happens, determining the social situation or the outcome. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about people as situations, persons as situations. Situations could involve a physical situation, right? Being in a certain environment, okay, like a warm or a cold environment, but also the presence of other people, the mere presence of other people, that is a situation. When you are alone, that's one situation. When there's somebody else there, that's a different situation. If there's a lot of people there, that's different, right? We're talking about descriptive and injunctive norms. We need to know the difference between those two, and they're very easy to confuse, okay? And we'll talk about scripts, which are very interesting. You have some idea of what a script is, but we're going to talk about how it applies to social psychology, and it's very interesting, okay? At least to me. And we'll talk about strong versus weak situations and how that relates to those other things, how it relates to scripts, injunctive, descriptive norms, right? And we'll talk about culture and how important that is. So first, let's talk about the mere presence of people. Mere presence. The mere presence of people is, it's enough to change our behavior, to change how we think and how we feel. Just having somebody there, it could be one person, it could be a lot of people. The mere presence of others affects how we think, how we feel, how we act. It affects all that stuff, okay? Like if you, for instance, when you went to high school, if you went to a small high school, you feel one way. If you went to a large high school, you probably felt different. I've heard that when you go to a small high school, that you feel more connected and you behave different. Everybody knows each other. People are nicer to each other. They take care of each other more. Your teachers care more about you, it seems like. When you go to a large high school, it just seems like you're just a number. There's thousands of people there. I went to one of those high schools. We had like 3,000 people in that high school. Graduating class was about 1,000, okay? And it feels different, right? You're in crowded classrooms. You seem like you're not that important to your teachers because they have a bunch of other students. There's more dysfunction. There's more, delinquency. There's more problems. You feel different there. You don't feel as valuable. And also you don't feel, because there's so many people, you don't feel like you're that identifiable. So you may also do things you otherwise wouldn't do because you feel like you can get lost in the crowd. We'll talk about things like that, something called de-individuation, right? But the mere presence of other people affects how you feel, right? I mean, just having one person there, right? You're in the elevator, you're by yourself, you feel one way. As soon as somebody else walks in, you feel completely different and you think differently. One person, right, is all it takes. Crowding and health, right? Being around other people can affect our health. Too many people can make us feel stressed out, anxious, can contribute to basically heart disease and illness because our immune system weakens if we are under high levels of stress or we endure prolonged stress. But crowding is a relative thing. Here in the US, we think certain places are crowded, like the big cities and things like that, maybe your apartment building and things like that. But it's a relative thing, right? Go to China or Japan, and they have a different idea. They have different standards when it comes to crowding, right? To them, that over there is normal. Those huge crowds, it's like you're in a parade of people whenever you go outside and you're walking around, right? They come here to the US and say, this isn't crowded, you're crazy, this is nothing. And they don't feel crowded, they don't feel as stressed out as we would because they're used to a higher level of crowding, okay? And some people who are used to living in a small city or in a small town, right? Even a couple of 100,000 people or 10,000 feels like a lot of people to them. When for others, like me, for instance, I grew up in the big city, right? Millions is crowded, right? LA over there. Here in the Antelope Valley, this doesn't feel crowded to me. But some people who grew up in different places, the Antelope Valley, feels crowded to them. To me, this feels like rural, okay? This feels like a small town because I grew up in a big city for the most of my life, I should say. Not my whole life, but most of my life. Evaluation and task performance, right? How do you feel when you're trying to do something like at work and your boss is looking at you? More stressed out, more anxious. The mere presence of somebody changes everything versus when they leave, right? And then you can relax, okay? Or when the instructor is walking by as you're taking the test and he's looking at you, he's looking at your paper, right? All that matters, right? The mere presence of other people affects how we feel, how we act, how we think. So we're talking about the situation. So we need to know about these things called descriptive norms. A descriptive norm, right? That is information about what people typically do in a situation. The descriptive norm describes what usually happens in a situation. That's the descriptive norm. Like for instance, during class, what usually happens is the professor lectures and you listen. You sit there quietly and you take notes, or maybe you just listen. But that is a descriptive norm, okay? And that is why most classes hardly have any discussion, because the descriptive norm is that you're supposed to just sit there and listen and be quiet, and the professor talks. And some classes, like mine, not right now because I'm recording, but like mine, I encourage discussion. I encourage questions. But most students are used to this, the descriptive norm. They're just used to the fact that, used to most classes, right? You just be quiet, sit there and let the professor talk and you don't interrupt, okay? But that's a descriptive norm. That's what we're used to, so that's how we behave, okay? Drinking in fraternities. The descriptive norm is that if you're a member of fraternity, you're gonna party a lot and you're gonna drink a lot. That is the descriptive norm. That's what usually happens. If you go to a funeral, there's a descriptive norm, right? You're supposed to be silent, okay? You're supposed to wear black and be silent. You're not supposed to show up in a red dress or in a white dress or, or some flashy outfit, even if you're a male, right? And you're not supposed to sit there socializing, and laughing, right? Like you're having a good time at a funeral. You're supposed to be silent, somber, right? Preferably wearing black. And I've been to some funerals and I've had family members that have died. And the thing is at these funerals, though, it is a sad occasion. When you go to these funerals, you also get to see people you haven't seen in years, in a long time, and you're happy to see them. And sometimes you have to remind yourself, this is a sad occasion. We should not be sad, but I'm very glad to see you, right? I'm so glad you're here. And there is some positivity. There is some positive things about it, but you need to remember that, no, you shouldn't be laughing and smiling and acting like you're having a good time. Somebody just died and, they're going to be buried today, and you're not supposed to be behaving that way. Those are descriptive norms, right? They are norms, right? Powerful things, norms that, information that tells us what usually happens in a situation. Okay, they are unwritten rules. It's not really the law necessarily, right? There is no law that says you need to wear black to a funeral. There is no law that says you need to drink if you're a member of a fraternity. There are some rules about, that when the professor's lecturing, you should listen, right? But the point is, these are usually unwritten things that people follow. We follow them because that's usually what happens. It's almost always what happens. So we're used to it and we do it without question, okay? And we behave the same way. And there's also injunctive norms, things about the situation that are powerful. An injunctive norm is gonna sound like a descriptive norm, but it's not the same thing. An injunctive norm refers to rules that define what typically is approved of and disapproved of in a situation. Injunctive norms tell us what is okay to do and what is not okay to do. What you should or should not do in a given situation. It sounds like a descriptive norm. It sounds like the same thing, but it's not. Okay, like for instance, when you hear a siren, when you're driving, you hear a siren, you're supposed to pull over. That's the injunctive norm. Okay, that's what you should do. You should not continue driving and be in the way. If you do that, by the way, you can get a big ticket, okay? But I'll tell you that the descriptive norm isn't the same as the injunctive norm. If you hear a siren, what you should do is pull over, okay, and get out of the way. Now, the descriptive norm, is that what always happens though? Sometimes you're in traffic and you hear a siren and you can't pull out of the way. There's too many cars, right? You should do that, but you can't. So what I find with when people are driving is that, yeah, you should pull out of the way, but most of the time you do not, but because you can't. You see how the descriptive norm and the injunctive norm are different? They can be the same thing, but the injunctive norm talks about what you should or should not do, what's approved of, what is disapproved of. The descriptive norm is just what happens, and what happens may not be something that is a good thing or that's approved of. You should repay other people for favors. That's the injunctive norm. That's what you should do. Somebody does you a favor, you should do them a favor. That's what you should do. Do most people repay favors? I don't know. But what they do, that's the descriptive norm. But you should repay people for favors. Here's one that will make it clear, more clear, the difference between an injunctive and a descriptive norm. And even so, some of you are going to get this confused on the homework on the exam. The injunctive norm, right? You should help those in need. That is what you should do. You should help people in need, right? People who are less fortunate than you, people who have less money, let's say, people who just need more assistance, whether they're blind or need trouble or have trouble crossing the street. You should help those in need. When you go to church and they ask you for donations for the needy, you should give, right? Or volunteer. You should volunteer to help the needy. That is the injunctive norm. That's what you should do. I will tell you though, that is not the descriptive norm. Most people don't do squat. Most people don't help those in need. Most people don't donate. Most people don't volunteer. Most people are not that involved. I know this because I've my own experiences. That's the way it is. Most people are not gonna, give a few bucks to that homeless person, right? They'll make excuses, say, oh, he just wants it for booze, right? Just wants it for beer or drugs. Most people, the collection plate, they'll just pass it to the next person. Most people will not, stop to help that old lady cross the street or whatever it is. Most people are not that way. Most people are pretty selfish. Okay, but we should help those in need. That's the injunctive norm. So there's a difference between the injunctive norm and the descriptive norm. The descriptive norm is what usually happens. So you do the same thing because that's what people do. Okay. And the injunctive norm is what you should or should not do, right? Whether it's okay or not. Let me give you another example. Hopefully this will make it clear. I just thought of it. The descriptive norm in our society is that people wear clothes. So most people wear clothes, right? That's what you should do. I mean, that's okay. That's different. That's the injunctive norm. Okay, that's the descriptive norm. Everybody pretty much wears clothes, okay? Even if it's hot, people are wearing clothes, okay? Now that's also what you should do. In this case, is what you should do. You should wear clothes, right? It is the law. You can get in trouble if you don't wear clothes. But there are places that you can go to where clothing is optional. There are nudist colonies, right? So there, the injunctive norm is, right? What is approved of is that you should be naked, right? That's what they approve of, okay? It's not a good example actually, because in those places, most people are naked too. What usually happens, by the way, if you go to a place like that, I'm not saying I've been, I've only read about it. If you go to some nudist colony, you show up there, what happens, and everybody's naked, except you. And you might think, oh, there's no way I would get naked. Oh, no way, I'm not gonna walk around naked, right? So you're the only one who's not naked. And you say, no, I'm not gonna do that. No way, okay, forget it, right? What usually happens is that after about 3 days, you're naked too. That's what happens. Or you go to a nude beach or something like that. You go there often enough, you're gonna end up doing the same thing, okay? Because usually we copy other people's behavior. We do what other people are doing. That's the descriptive norm. Now, whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, that can be different. That's the injunctive norm. I think I just confused you guys a bit more with that example, but there is a difference. One is what usually happens and the other one is what should happen. And what should happen isn't always what happens. And that it's clear when you talk about helping those in need. We should help those in need. Most people don't do it. Here's something that's very interesting. At least I find it very interesting. Scripts. Scripts are also things about the situation that are powerful, that greatly affect our behavior, how we think and how we feel. A script is a list of events that happens in a predictable order in a situation. There is a script that if you want things to work well, if you want positive outcomes, there's a script that you should follow for most situations. There's a script about how you ask someone out on a date. There's a script about how you get engaged. There's a way you should do things, is what I'm saying. Okay? And scripts can vary, right, in different cultures. We'll talk about culture in a moment, but that's a script, right? There's a way in which you actually ask somebody out on a date. And this is the way it's supposed to be over here. I wish I would have known this when I was younger. Right? I would have gotten a lot less rejection, right? But this is the way, this is the script for getting a date. You want to get a date, this is more or less how it should go. It increases your chances of success. What happens first is two people notice each other, right? They're like they see each other from across the room. They get caught staring at each other and they smile, right? You know that you're both interested, okay? And then they attempt to accidentally come across each other again. They basically try to make it happen so that they end up being in the same situation again, right? Then they get a friend to introduce them. They get someone to basically say, hey, this is my friend so-and-so, or this is my friend Sally, or whatever it is. And then they start talking to each other. They get to know each other. And then one person finally asks the other one out. And hopefully the other person says, yes, I'll go out with you. That's the way it should happen, right? According to research, that's the way it usually happens. If you know, and that's the script you should follow if you want things to more or less work out okay. Okay, you know, if you don't follow the script, you're more likely to get rejected, right? If you are like those people who just look around, see someone you like, and then you just show up there and say, hey, you know, right? Who are you, right? What's your name? You want to go out with me, right? You're more likely to be rejected. And that's how I was. I didn't know. I didn't know. I was naive. I'm not socially, I'm a little bit awkward, to tell you the truth. But people who know how to handle people, how to be with people, how to basically, people who are more social, this comes naturally to them. They just know how to talk to people, how to meet people, right? They know how to get in people's good graces, so to speak. Some of us are more awkward than others, and some of us need to know this stuff, right? So we can know how to do things right. But that's a script. If you follow it, things are more likely to work out okay. There's a script about how you also get engaged, a way in which it should work, right? And I would love to have your responses now, but I'm recording, so I'm gonna have to ask you about that later. But the way the script usually goes is like this, right? So you've been together for a while and you love each other, right? And usually the guy decides that basically he is going to, propose to the woman, basically. Sometimes he asks parents for her parents for permission. That usually doesn't happen nowadays yet. In the past, that used to be a part of it. It doesn't have to be a part of it anymore. But you've been together for a long time. You love each other, that kind of stuff. And you have plans to be with each other forever. You've talked about getting married, that kind of stuff, right? So then at some point, the guy basically ends up buying a ring somewhere, secretly, doesn't tell her about it, and he hides it somewhere. And then they go to some nice place, right? It could be a vacation spot, right? Depending how much money you have, you might go to Paris or go to some nice beach or some nice restaurant, or just a place that is nice, that you both enjoy, or that you think you both enjoy. You go there together, right? And you wait for the moment to be right for a nice romantic situation. Could be maybe when you're having dinner or you're talking or there's a nice sunset or something like that. And then he pops out the ring. No, he basically gets on his knees, okay? Takes out the ring and asks, will you marry me? And she smiles, right? And is happy. And then she is supposed to say yes. That's the way it's supposed to go. I might have missed some steps, but it goes something like that. If you don't do it the right way, you're more likely to get a no, right? There's guys that they've been with someone for they've only been together a short time, might have been a few days, a few weeks, and they're like, hey, will you marry me? It's like, no, that's not the script. You haven't been together long enough. What the hell are you doing, right? Or guys that are even more desperate than that, right? And I'm not saying that they're necessarily bad people, but there's some women who are just so beautiful that they go walking out in public and guys would just come up to them and propose to them. total strangers. Like, no, you're not gonna get a yes, okay? You're a stranger, okay? No, you need to be together first and together for a while and know what you're getting into, and you know that this is something that's gonna happen. And at some point, the guy takes the lead, so to speak. He takes certain steps and and proposes. And your job, by the way, as the female, is to say yes if he does everything right. And to tell you the truth, there's many times when women feel pressured to say yes because he did everything right, but you still don't want to marry him. But you say yes because he did everything right, and then maybe you regret it later on. There's women who have said yes, and then a couple of weeks go by and say, no, I can't do this. I just can't. Then why did you say yes? Well, because at that moment, everything was right, and you did everything right. And yeah, because when people follow the script, usually there's a certain outcome that's more likely to happen, right? You're more likely to say yes if they follow the script, even though maybe you don't quite want that. But you need to be honest, right? Even if they follow the script, you need to be honest, try to be strong, but yeah, you might feel pressured. Oh, and especially, can you imagine this? Especially if maybe they do it at a nice dinner and your family's there, his family's there, and there he asks you to marry him and you don't want to marry him. What are you going to say? Right? What are you going to say? You're going to say, no, I don't want to marry you. You're embarrassing him in front of his family and in front of your family. And a lot of women might feel pressured to do that, right? And that has happened. There's some guys who really put you on the spot where you cannot say no, or you're going to cause a lot of trouble. Okay. But that's a script, right? It's usually a rule. It's usually a set of situations that people follow. Like, first you do this, then this and that, right? And there's scripts for a lot of different things. And even though you may not realize it. Let's talk about strong versus weak situations. Strong situations are situations where people need to act in a certain way. They demand that people act in a certain way. A strong situation, there are very obvious descriptive and injunctive norms. In other words, this is what people mostly do in this situation, and this is what you should not do or what you should do. And it's also highly scripted. You do it in this order. An example would be a funeral. You should dress this way, right? Descriptive norms. You shouldn't say these kind of things. You shouldn't laugh, right? Injunctive norms, highly scripted, right? There's an order in which the funeral procession occurs, in a certain order to things. I don't remember the order very well. I can't really tell too much about it, but I've been to several, right? But usually find out the way it works because everybody's following the rules. There's also a job interview is a very strong situation. There's a way you're supposed to dress. Follow the descriptive norm. You're supposed to dress professionally. Unless your job is something else where you're going to be some lifeguard, let's say, or something else. But most jobs, you dress professionally. And, there are rules about what is allowed, what's not allowed, right? There's injunctive norms. Yes, you should dress professionally, and most people do. And, as a guy, yes, you should wear a tie, right? And you should not be showing off too many tattoos. If you have tattoos, you need to hide those. You need to be well groomed, right? That's what's approved of. If you're a woman, believe it or not, and some women get this wrong, you should not be showing that much skin. You shouldn't be showing that much leg or that much cleavage. And some women, are not aware of that. They're used to dressing a certain way and they think that's going to help them. And it actually may make you look really bad at the job interview. You're showing too much cleavage, too much skin. It makes you look like you're someone that they can't really trust. Okay. There are stereotypes about women who show too much skin. Okay. And often, that's not who the company wants to hire. Scripts, right? You listen. Wait. Okay. Well, here's the script. Okay. The interviewer asks the questions, and you answer the question. You're not the one who gets to answer the questions. Who asks the questions? You answer the questions. The interview can make a joke if he or she wants. You don't get to make the jokes. And I forgot to mention, when you go in there, you shake hands. Okay, things like that. And then, you wait until they ask you to sit down, and you sit down. You don't put your feet up on the chair or on the desk, right? You're violating injunctive norms, right? Those are some examples, okay, of strong situations. There are others. Weak situations are situations where people can behave in many different ways. The descriptive norms are not very strong, and the injunctive norms aren't very strong either. And they're not highly scripted, like at a nightclub, right? You know, yeah, a lot of people will be dancing, but not everybody. You don't necessarily have to dance. A lot of people will be drinking, but you don't have to. Injunctive norms are also vague. Yeah, some people are, you know, can be loud and obnoxious. Some people may be quiet, and, you know, some people may be talkative. You know, some people hang out in groups. Other people just kind of want to, you know, peel off and go and meet somebody, right? It varies a lot, right? And it's not highly scripted. People will do things in different orders. Some people arrive earlier, some people later, some people get their drinks right away, some people dance first and then get drinks, and, you know, there's different things. Some people just dance and want to have a good time. Some people want to pick up and hook up at nightclubs. Some people have been known to have sex in the nightclub, okay? What I'm saying is it could be all over the place. It's kind of a weak situation in that way. What you should do and should not do, it can vary. The way you should dress could vary, or what you do, and the order of things that you follow could also differ. Also at a picnic, it's a weak situation, right? You can have a picnic in different ways. Sure, you can have it, you know, the way you see it in the movies with you put a nice picnic blanket and you bring a little basket and stuff like that, and you sit down there. But you could also do it differently. You can just bring a cooler and you know, and have some sandwiches in there and just plop yourself down on a bench and you know, eat and feed the birds at the same time. I mean, a lot of different things you can do, and you can speak different ways, you know, and you can laugh or be silent. It's a weak situation. But you need to know the difference between a strong and a weak situation. Culture matters as well. Culture is very powerful in determining what we think, how we feel, the way we behave. Culture is defined as the beliefs, customs, and habits and language shared by people living in a particular time and place. Okay, so it has to do with a bunch of different things. Okay, and more things than just that. It has to do with your identity, how you feel about yourself, traditions, all sorts of things. That's culture. And socialization is the process that process through which you learn about the culture, how you learn about the beliefs, the customs, the habits, and the language. That's socialization, right? It's been said that the US doesn't have much culture. We do have a culture here. It's a very materialistic culture, very consumer-driven culture. You know, very sexual culture, okay? Culture of freedom and all sorts of things, right? And how are we socialized? How do we learn about that stuff? We learn about it through our parents, through school, through the internet, through TV, right? That's part of our socialization. In other countries or other places, even here in the US, socialization might occur more through church or other things. They might have maybe stronger cultures or stronger traditions or be more, whatever it is, more religious. But these are just definitions. What I really want you to know about this is that there's a difference between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. Individualistic cultures are cultures that socialize or teach their members to think of themselves as individuals and give priority to their own personal goals, right? You matter in an individualistic culture, right? It's whatever you want, right? What you want to do, you can, like in this country, right? You can listen to whatever music you want to listen to. You can eat what you want, right? You can live where you want as long as you can afford it, okay? You can talk however you want, okay? We have freedom of speech and freedom of expression, right? So you can, you know, you can get drunk. Marijuana is legal in a lot of places now. You can say F you to the president if you want, and you won't get arrested, okay? It's an individualistic culture, right? You decide how to think, how to act, how to say, you know, what you want to say, how you want to say it. There are some places where you can get into trouble, right? Like in school, there's a certain way you need to act and dress and talk, right? Or at a job, right? You have less freedom there, right? But overall, you have more freedom than you realize, okay? There are consequences for violating some norms and things like that, but it's an individualistic culture. And I can give you the perfect example of that. The perfect example of that would be your smartphone. In the smartphone, you have your contacts. You have your social networks with your friends. You have your movies and the website that you go to. Everything, your whole little world in the palm of your hands. This is the pinnacle of individualism here. Your own little world in the palm of your hands in this smartphone. And this is something, of course, that's become popular around the world. Yeah, guess where this stuff is coming from? all this stuff about the smartphone and the internet and all this stuff, that's making the whole world more individualistic. It's all coming from the US. And not only that, from California, and not only that, mostly from Silicon Valley, right? That's complete individualism. And I should say, by the way, that you can also, in this country, you can have as friends, whoever you want to have as your friend, as long as they're willing to accept you as a friend. You can marry who you want as long as they agree to marry you, right? And that's the way it is, you know, in individualism. If you don't like the government, you can complain about it and scream about it and cuss out the members of Congress, right? And cuss out the president, right? Even if you have a TV show, you can talk crap about the president. That's individualism, okay? When you do something wrong, you get punished and they throw you in jail. You're responsible, okay? Collectivist cultures are different, very different. Collectivist cultures are cultures in which the members are socialized to think of themselves as part of a larger group and to place the group's concerns before their own. In a collectivist culture, you are not what matters so much. It's the group that matters. It's the family, it's the church, or it's the country or something like that. I do want to point out the US used to be more collectivist and now we're more individualistic, but there are a lot of people here in the US that are still part of a stronger collectivist culture. Those are people who usually are more religious, or people of certain ethnic groups are more collectivist, like Latinos are more collectivist, so are Asian people, you know, so are Black people, you know. Who's more individualistic? White people, most individualistic. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong. I'm not saying collectivism is wrong or individualism is wrong. But the more we basically have contact with and the more we live in the US and the European countries and Australia, where there's a bunch of white people, the more individualistic we also become, even if we're members of a collectivist culture, okay? But in collectivist cultures, the family has more influence. And if you talk about extreme collectivism, you don't even get to marry who you want. They have arranged marriages in some places. And in some places, you don't get to pick who your friends are. You don't get to pick how you dressed, what music you listen to, what you eat. You don't have those freedoms. The group decides, right? The church decides, the family decides, the country decides. Some countries have an entire religion that everyone has to follow, and other religions are outlawed. There are some countries where religion is just not allowed at all. Anything, right? That everyone's supposed to be either agnostic or atheist. They don't allow religion. But basically in these cultures, you don't matter as much. You don't have as much rights, as much freedom, and you should not be calling so much attention to yourself, okay? When you succeed, let's say you get a degree, let's say you graduate from Harvard or something like that. If you're a member of a collectivist culture, what you're supposed to do is basically give credit to other people. And when you have your little party that you're gonna celebrate this, you're supposed to say that it is not because of me that I am here. It's not because of me that I've gotten this degree. It is because of you guys. It's because of my family. It's because of my friends and all of you who supported me. That's what you're supposed to say. Especially, by the way, if you're Latino, right? If you are Asian, especially. I think Black people do, but I'm not sure because you know, I think you can brag a little bit more if you're Black as well. We'll talk about that. That comes up later in a different chapter. But that's what you're supposed to do. If you go out there and you say, oh, it's because of how hard I work, it's about me, because I'm so smart, you know what's gonna happen to you? If you're a member of that culture, they're not gonna like you. And you show up there with your nice car and they're gonna key your car. Oh, here comes the, you know, Miss Big Shot, or, you know, the big shit, they're gonna say, stuff like that, right? They won't like you. You're not supposed to call too much attention to yourself. You're supposed to be humble. I do know that there is still some of this in America among white people as well. Latinos are a bit more collectivist, although we are becoming very individualistic. I consider myself very individualistic, by the way. I mean, I still also have some of this, and you know, I've been taught that, and a lot of you have too. It's not always based on, you know, on basically ethnicity or race or things like that. But I will tell you that some cultures or some ethnicities are more collectivist than others. And the US, okay, here's the thing. The US is the #1 individualistic culture in the world, or the country with the most individualism, the most individualistic country. And it's not a surprise that this is where the internet comes from. right? This is where the smartphone comes from, right? Apple, Facebook, social networking, all that stuff. That is individualism to the extreme. Your own little world in the palm of your hands now. And it has gotten so ridiculous that now I go places and people aren't even living in reality anymore. Everyone's on their phone. Everyone's looking at a screen, even when they're outside, when they're shopping. People don't even notice each other anymore. People go on dates now and they're on their phones across from each other. This individualism, right, is mostly coming from the US, and it's spreading all over the place, of course, to China and other places that are more collectivist, right? Because now they have smartphones too. They also have the internet. But China is a lot less collective, is a lot more collectivist. And in China, they're trying to control the population a bit more. In China, you don't get to decide what site you go to. It's very controlled. There are certain sites that you can go to on the internet and certain sites that you cannot go to. You can't talk crap about the government or they'll arrest you and they can make you disappear. Okay, more collectivist. The country, the Communist Party, I believe they're communists, as a whole matter more than you as an individual. They'll sacrifice you as an individual for the good of the stability of the country. Okay? You have no right there in China to overthrow the government if you don't like it. If you don't like it, then they can get rid of you instead. In the US, we don't like the government, we can get rid of it. Okay? Canada is also pretty individualistic. It's a white country. So is Europe, right? But look, South Korea, Asian countries in general, a lot more collectivist. Number 44, a lot more collectivist. Japan, more collectivist. Mexico, more collectivist. In general, I know Latinos and Asian people are more collectivist, meaning they're more family-oriented, more group-oriented, right? You might know that if you're Latino or even Middle Eastern and a place like that, more collectivist, when it comes to you deciding where you're going to go to college, what does your family want and what do they want you to do? They want you to stay nearby. No, you stay here with us. I want you to go somewhere in Southern California or in California. You stay nearby, right? No, hell no. You're not going all the way to Massachusetts. I don't care if it's Harvard. We want you to stay here. And when you get married, we want to make sure we meet the guy or we meet the person and that we accept them. And if we don't accept them, then you shouldn't marry them. You still can, but they won't like you and they might not go to your wedding. Okay, more collectivist, right? Of course, that is changing. Latinos and everybody else is becoming more individualistic. Individualism is spreading around the world and becoming, just the main thing. If you go back in the past, almost every culture was collectivist in the past. The US was more collectivist. Americans more collectivist. Used to be more family oriented, more church oriented, just a lot more collectivist when we lived in smaller towns, smaller groups. But individualism is just the way of the future and is spreading more and more. And I hope it doesn't end up like in the movie The Matrix, where in the future we just end up, each of us living in our own pods, disconnected from all reality, right? And we just live in our own little world. And it seems like we're there already for some people, like we're in front of a screen all the time, and we have no real contact with the outside world. We think we do, but we don't even notice it, right? And I think that's a sad thing. It's gotten extreme. It's gotten to be too much. Let's talk about how, not just things about the person and the situation, but also the fact that the person and the situation can interact with each other. Okay, when you combine things about the person and things about the situation, you can get a very different outcome, okay, than you would expect. Okay, like here's some examples here. Different persons respond differently to the same situation, and that is very obvious. Some people can thrive in a class like mine, and other people might fail miserably because they respond differently. Some people enjoy it, some people hate it, okay? Most people like my class. I do look at when students do evaluations and things like that. Also, situations choose the person. There are some situations that choose certain kinds of people. Like sometimes when we have a certain kind of environment or certain things going on in the country, we're more likely to elect a Republican, for instance. During different situations, we're more likely to elect a Democrat. When there's a lot of fear and there's potential war and things like that, people are more likely to choose a Republican. Republicans are more likely to win. During times of peace and things are going okay, we're more likely to choose a Democrat. There are exceptions, but the point is, in general, different situations call for different people, for different leaders. And that's an interaction, okay? People also choose their situations. People choose what situations they want to confront and which ones they don't. You choose which classes that you want to take, right? The ones you're more likely to succeed in. what kind of jobs you want to have, who what kind of people you're more likely to talk to, right? We choose those situations. Okay, different people prime different parts of the person, or different situations, I should say. And some situations might bring out the best in you, and you might seem very competent and nice or whatever it is. And in some situations bring out the worst in you. You might feel incompetent and stupid in those situations, or you might even act wild and crazy or aggressive and be really mean. The same person could seem like a wonderful person in one situation, and such a nice, wonderful person. And in another situation, they can seem like the most awful human being in a different situation. Some situations, and by the way, I want to bring out people, bring out the worst in you. They get you so upset, so pissed off that they basically make you aggressive and mean and cuss and everything. And other people, basically bring out the best in you. People also change the situation. There's some people that change the situation, that change things. I've had students in my classes, one person is enough to change the situation on the positive end and on the negative end. I've had some students that are so bad that they ruin the whole class because they are so mean, so judgmental, and they're there basically making their mean comments and making their remarks or making their grunts or whatever it is, making it clear they're very displeased, and then nobody wants to share in class, right? And it's not fun. And there's other people who've also who are so open and who talk so much and share so much that they encourage other people to share. And then we all have a good time. I've had classes like that. Believe it or not, I teach research methods, which is a class that is not so interesting. I mean, we talk about how to do research and APA style and things. It doesn't seem that it's that interesting. But I've had classes where I've had certain people in that class just that I know from like the psych club, or even people who I've known also because they've taken class from me before, they're honor students, stuff like that. And I've had some people like that make the class really fun and interesting. And I've had people tell me, that's the best class I've ever taken. That's the most fun class. And I asked them, are you sure? It's research methods? But they said they really enjoyed it because of the way things work there, because of certain people who just change the whole thing and make it so much better. And of course, there are some people who ruin everything. I'm sure you guys could think of some people like that. You can think of that not just for classes, but you can think of that for your families, your friends maybe, or maybe even for our country, right? Some people who just ruin everything, who just make us so angry and divided, right? And also situations change the person. There are some situations, maybe some jobs, maybe some classes that will change you. Will you have a certain experience that you have that will just change you as a person and help you grow, right? And some situations that will change you for the better, or some situations that will change you for the worse. I'll give you one example. Some people, join the military and come back as such a changed person. Some people are just very irresponsible and just aren't going to amount to much. And then they go to the military and they straighten them out in the military. And then they come back and now they're responsible and orderly and they obey, and because you're taught that in the military. But also in certain families, certain classes, certain situations, they can change you for the better, and some can change you for the worse. And there's also the last thing here, person situation fit. It matters the extent to which you fit your situation. There are some situations in which you fit in well, and they'll bring out the best in you. And there are some situations in which you fit in very poorly, and they'll bring out the worst in you, or you won't do very well. I think of myself as a fairly competent person, okay? But in some situations, I can seem really stupid and incompetent because that's just not my thing. And we're all like that. There are some situations in which we thrive, we fit in very well, and there's some situations in which we fail because we don't fit in very well. And part of self-regulation is for us to choose the things that are appropriate for us. But sometimes we learn that through trial and error. We learn that by failing at some things and succeeding in others, and eventually knowing more or less where we need to go. All right, that is it, you guys. I'll stop recording.